Blue alien goats from outer space. Hopefully, if you're not even a World of Warcraft player, that's got your attention. I hope so, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. My favourite race, I would say, in all of World of Warcraft, and actually the reason that I started playing the game in the first place. I love the Draenei, and they have been part of this whole universe for many, many, many years. They were known by another name way back when. They are millennia, thousands and thousands of years old. But at the same time, they've seen tens of thousands of years of tragedy. They've lost their home, they've lost their numbers, and yet they keep going, they keep fighting, and they're filled with hope. A little backstory for you. I'll do a very, very short version of how I got into World of Warcraft in the first place. So I was just finishing university, and I think I saw an advert for World of Warcraft on TV or something, and I thought it was a really cool idea. But then I heard the stories of people just absolutely putting their lives aside to play this game and losing hours every single day, sometimes entire days, to playing this game. And I thought to myself, I really want to try it, but I'm going to wait until I finish university, and then I'm going to get World of Warcraft just as a treat to myself. This was around the time that I think Wrath of the Lich King was about to come out. But the main draw for me were these strange, elegant, blue, goat-looking creatures. I had never seen anything like that before, and it made me want to play it, something crazy. So I saw the Draenei, and that was it for me. Finished university, bought World of Warcraft, started my very first character, who was a Draenei, who I still have to this day and who I still play. The rest is history. I've been playing ever since. Enough preamble though. Shall we get into the long and storied history of the Draenei of Azeroth? I think we should. Let's get into it. Many long years ago on the planet of Argus, a race known as the Eredar came into being. They were extremely intelligent, and they had an affinity for all things magic. They had such a strong knowledge and talent that they built this entire civilization around that fact. It was great and vast, and it was the kind of civilization where art and science were just merging together seamlessly to create something beyond anyone's imagination. Which sounds incredible to me. You know, art, science, magic and technology all coming together, woven into each other to create something out of sci-fi, quite literally. At that time, they were aided by an already ancient artifact known as the Atamal crystal. It was this triangular crystal that they didn't quite know the origin of. All they knew was that it had existed in their society before they could even remember. Their legends did say that it was a gift though, and we'll come back around to that a little bit later. The very height of this incredible society came about 13,000 years ago, and they had 3 prominent leaders in their community. Those 3 leaders were known as kil'jaeden, Archimonde, and Velen. Eventually, these 3 leaders were approached by the Titan Sargeras. He claimed to be impressed by their work, and frankly, who wouldn't be? If you've seen any Draenei structures and how grand they are, I would be impressed, personally. But for a Titan to be impressed by the work of a mortal race, that's really saying something. And he wanted to give them even more knowledge and power in exchange for their loyalty. Suspicious, right? You would think. kil'jaeden and Archimonde wouldn't question his intentions at all. They took the deal, believing that it would empower their people, push them forward. It was only Velen, out of all 3 of those leaders, who thought something was a bit weird going on. So Velen went to the Atamal crystal seeking advice, some kind of sign, and he touched it. Doing so gave him a vision of the future that he could not ignore. It filled him with dread, and he saw the darkness that his people were heading towards. More than that, he saw that his people siding with Sargeras would turn them into demons. He saw the burning legion, its might and terror, and the destruction it would wreak upon all of creation. Though he tried to warn his fellow leaders, they completely dismissed him and professed their loyalty to Sargeras. And of course, Sargeras did exactly what Velen had foreseen and transformed a large portion of the Eredar into warlocks. So they dealt with dark magic and would cast dark spells. Velen found himself completely on his own, with only a handful of Eredar sharing his concerns. While they tried to come up with a solution, this small group eventually realised that their only chance of survival was to flee their home planet of Argus. That was a tough sell though, and it seemed impossible to Velen, to the point that it was bringing him down into the depths of despair. It was in this despair that the Atamal crystal would come to Velen's aid. It rose from its pedestal and began to glow. And while it glowed, a voice came into Velen's mind, telling him that the crystal was in fact a device of the race of the Naaru, a very ancient race of beings made out of pure energy whose entire purpose was to fight the Burning Legion. The Naaru who spoke to him, Kure, offered to take this group of Eredar to safety, and it instructed them to also bring the Atamal crystal. Of course, the Naaru revealed that it was a gift from them, and it could be used as a beacon to bring them to the Eredar whenever they were in trouble. Velen was understandably relieved, and he gathered himself and his followers, the small group of them that were left, at a place that would one day be known as Triumvirate's End. They only numbered in hundreds at that point, out of the entire race of Eredar that existed. However, what he didn't know was that one of his old friends, Talgath, had betrayed him to the Legion. He had sided with kil'jaeden and was beginning to pursue the group alongside Archimonde. In the end, Velen's group were barely able to escape Argus. They took flight on the Naaru ship known as the Genedar. Genedar? I wish I had looked this up before I started making this video. Please excuse the pronunciation. But anyway, in their escape, the Atamal crystal actually broke into several pieces. And another of the Naaru, Lura, actually stayed behind to waylay the Burning Legion and their followers and allow Velen's group to escape. Kil'jaeden, of course, was absolutely furious that Velen and his followers had gotten away, and then he made a promise to pursue them, chase them, hunt them down across all of space until the end of time. So here they were, Velen's group of a few hundred of the Eredar, fleeing from their homeworld without any idea of where they were going to go next. And so they renamed themselves, no longer the Eredar, but the Draenei, which in their language means the exiled ones. For a long time they fled and hid among the many worlds in the vast cosmos, exploring as they went in their quest to find a safe home. But still, kil'jaeden would never give up. Meanwhile, the Naaru would give their blessings to the Draenei, this new group of exiled Eredar who had nothing. This is when they were imbued with the knowledge and the power of the light, the very energy that the Naaru are made of. They explained that there were other forces in the cosmos that would stand against the Burning Legion, and that one day the Naaru would bring them all together to form the Army of the Light. The Draenei were deeply affected by this, and vowed from that point onwards to always serve and honour the light, and uphold the Naaru's ideals. And this is why when you're in game and you choose a Draenei, you can of course play a paladin, and it's the class that I would say, maybe alongside priests and mages, are most synonymous with the Draenei. While the Draenei would visit many worlds on the Genedar, at some point there was a split and the group branched off into two. Some stayed on the Genedar, but another group split off on a different Naaru ship called the Zenedar. And these specific Draenei that split off in the Zenedar were what would eventually become the Light-Forged Draenei, who you can play as an allied race. More than 200 years before the First War, Velen and his followers found what looked like a remote and peaceful world to settle on. They named it Draenor, and they began to cultivate their society there once again, while still at the back of their minds being wary about kil'jaeden's eternal pursuit. What they hadn't accounted for, though, was the fact that the planet was already occupied. Draenor, as it turned out, was the homeworld of the orcs. Yes, the orcs, the same orcs that you can go into World of Warcraft and play if you choose the Horde side. But that's a story for an entirely different day, probably the orc lore video that I'll make at some point. All you need to know is orcs came from Draenor first before they even arrived on Azeroth. When the Genedar crash-landed on the planet, the orcs saw it as a crystal mountain, and they named it Oshugan, which in their language meant the Mountain of Spirits. They began holding festivals there like Kosharg, and they would communicate with the spirits of their dead ancestors at the base of this mountain. At this time, the races had no quarrel with each other. They were totally fine, and in fact, they coexisted really peacefully with each other. They visited together, they traded, tools, weapons, furs, decorative things, and they generally just had an okay time. The orcs were curious about them for sure, but any interaction between them only ever lasted about a few hours. The Draenei weren't that willing to invite closeness, and none of the clan leaders had ever really invited them in a warm sort of way. So it was good but kind of aloof, I suppose, and everyone just seemed happier that way. Of course, no amount of preparation could ever prepare the Draenei for the arrival of the Burning Legion, who, after many years, would catch up with them eventually. Talgath, who, if you remember, was kil'jaeden's minion now, found them in Draenor, drawn by the scent of Eredar magic after millennia of them being far away and beyond reach. Kil'jaeden ordered him to investigate the world first, and Talgath let him know not only about the Draenei, but the presence of the orcs as well. Kil'jaeden wanted to punish the exiles of the Eredar, humiliate them, and break them. He would gain an orc protege, the shaman Gul'dan. He would corrupt him, and in turn, the majority of the shamanistic orcs. The orcs were no longer just wary of the Draenei, but they had been stirred up into rage and bloodlust. And they didn't hesitate to attack their Draenei neighbours. This would be a conflict that lasted nearly 8 years, but in that time the orcs did a lot of damage. They killed over 80% of the Draenei race, roughly every 9 of 10 individuals. The rest had no choice but to flee for their lives to the remote corners of the planet. Kil'jaeden was pleased for a time. He thought his revenge was complete. Velen and the very few of those left fled to the marshes on the coast of the Zangar Sea. Having said that though, those who fought the orcs and survived had been tainted, corrupted by the fell magic that they wielded. And those fighters, those brave soldiers who fought the orcs head-on, discovered that they had lost their link with the light as a result. Those Draenei mutated into lesser forms, resulting in the subspecies known as the Broken and the Lost Ones. They have a couple of very cool members who you can still find in-game, such as Nobundo and Akama. The Alliance of Azeroth would eventually find their way to Draenor through the Dark Portal, which again is another story. Maybe it deserves its own video, but there was a Dark Portal in Draenor that had a link to Azeroth, and they came through that portal. And they would come to the aid of the Draenei, giving them at least some kind of hope, and they would send out emissaries on a diplomatic mission, which would kind of be a precursor to the Draenei actually joining the Alliance many years later. But for now, Akama and a small band of the Lost Ones would continue to battle orcs for a time, though they were losing. The orcs were being commanded by a terrible lord of the Burning Legion, known as Magtheridon, basically hunting the Draenei to extinction. But at the Black Temple, they would join with the elven demon hunter Illidan's Stormrage to take back their ancestral lands. The Blood Elves would also eventually find themselves on Draenor, though they were nowhere near as kind or as helpful as the Alliance had been. They discovered the power of Tempest Keep. Tempest Keep is a giant Naaru ship base made of several different moving parts, and which could be kind of detached into separate ships. I'll insert a picture here somewhere so you can get a visual idea of what it looks like. Anyway, the Blood Elves seized Tempest Keep, and the Draenei would of course fight back, eventually wresting back control of one of the wings of Tempest Keep, known as the Eredar. They tried to detach it and use it as a ship to, once again, flee this home that they had tried to make for themselves. However, the Blood Elves managed to sabotage their engine. They were sent hurtling through space, and the remains of Tempest Keep you can still see in-game to this day in the area known as Netherstorm. Now, this being a Naaru spaceship, it had the power, in theory, to shift across planes. And so the Draenei tried to do this, but of course the Blood Elves had sabotaged the engine, and it went haywire. Completely out of control, it happened to approach Azeroth, and it hurtled down and eventually crash-landed in a chain of islands off the west coast of Kalimdor, known as the Azure Mist Isles. This is your starting area when you begin as a Draenei player. And I love it. It's so good, and the music is so beautiful and atmospheric. I've played it several times and never got tired of it. The survivors of the crash did what they could to scavenge and survive, not only worried about themselves, but the state of the land and the effect that they had on the plants and creatures of the surroundings. Of course, this is alien magic in this spaceship that's leaking out into the land from the crash, so it kind of mutated some of the wildlife. You'll see that if you play through as a new Draenei. Unfortunately, they also discovered that the Blood Elves had followed them back to Azeroth, with the intention to, of course, destroy them all and enslave the Naaru whose home was in the Eredar, who was called Oros. And they just wanted to steal the crashed ship altogether. The Draenei are really good at fighting back though, and of course they did, protecting what was theirs. But eventually they would seek out the Alliance to join forces with them, wanting to be part of a faction that they knew and had heard of to be brave and heroic against their eternal enemies, the Burning Legion. This was something that the Prophet Velen had long foreseen, and together they were able to unravel a plot by the faction of Blood Elves known as the Sun Fury to harm them. From there, the Draenei would play a key role in urging the Alliance to return to Draenor, which is also known as Outland, and disrupt the Legion bases that were operating there. They did, armed with this unshakable faith in the light that had followed them for thousands of years, even with everything they had been through. And they were able to reconnect with some of their kin who had actually stayed behind on Draenor/Outland to hold down the fort, I guess. They also returned to one of their largest cities, and one of my favourite cities, Shatrath, and were able to make it flourish all over again. Some Blood Elves did try to storm the city, of course, but it turned out that they did so to gain the attention of the Naaru who lived there, Adal. They actually wanted to serve the Naaru, believing that it was the only chance for their race's survival. Why did they need help surviving? That is a story for the Blood Elf video. Ha ha ha. So they did, and they formed a faction in the city known as the Scryers. They existed alongside the Aldor, who were a faction of Draenei priests. Tenuously though, they were always bickering and had some tension between them. Meanwhile, the Blood Elves back on Azeroth, in their capital of Silvermoon City, were siphoning the light from a Naaru they had captured called Muru. Muru had been taken by their prince, Kael'thas Sunstrider, and they used the energies that they siphoned from Muru to create their faction of Blood Knights, essentially Blood Elf paladins. Kael'thas was just really unhappy with the way things were going, so he decided to ally himself with the Burning Legion. Great job, well done. That decision won't go wrong in any way, shape or form. So he stole Muru from his people and escaped to the Sunwell, which is like the Blood Elves' font of magical power. And he tried to use the Naaru, Muru, to summon kil'jaeden into Azeroth. This was just enough nonsense for the Aldor and the Scryers of Shattrath to put aside their differences and begin working together. They formed the Shattered Sun Offensive, and they managed to work together just enough to stop Kael'thas's plan from ever coming into fruition. Muru was completely drained of energy though, and died, as much as a being of pure energy can die. However, before it died, Velen was able to take a spark from Muru and use it to reignite the Sunwell, giving the Blood Elves back their font of power without corruption. Which is a very interesting and selfless act considering the history that the Blood Elves and the Draenei have and the animosity between them. And kinda just goes to show how selfless the Draenei can be even after everything they have seen and everything they have been through and all that they've lost. In any case, while some of the Draenei chose to stay on Outland to help rebuild, the majority returned to Azeroth to uphold their commitment to the Alliance. Of course, all of this happened in the Burning Legion expansion, the very first expansion of World of Warcraft, where the Draenei, and the Blood Elves for that matter, were introduced, but they do still pop up now and then in the expansions that follow after that. I'm gonna rattle through it. In Wrath of the Lich King, you could find a few of them in Northrend, but for the most part they were absent because they were told that they weren't needed there due to some meddling by a group known as the Cult of the Damned. During the Cataclysm, there was some effort by the Draenei to reach out to some lost ones living in the Swamp of Sorrows. And you could also find some Draenei moving to the hinterlands. In fact, if you go in-game today, there is, I believe, a High Elf lodge where some of the Draenei have settled. In Warlords of Draenor, we're introduced actually to an alternate timeline version of the Draenei, who are eventually led by Yrel. When I was playing through that expansion, I thought she was really cool, but there's not much to say here because Blizzard absolutely dropped the ball and forgot about that entire storyline, and nothing ever really came from it. Good going. It's in the Legion expansion that we really see the Draenei step up again, which makes sense. It's their eternal enemy. Velen was a prominent leader against the Legion. However, the story brings us towards his son, Rakeesh, who was corrupted by the Legion. It's a really sad story. He assaults the Exiled and captures and destroys the Naaru Oros who lives there. And we're forced to slay Rakeesh, which, as you can imagine, Velen doesn't take very well. With Draenei being immortal beings, I believe they don't really have kids that often, similar to Lord of the Rings elves, I guess. When you're immortal, it's not a priority, I suppose. Through the story, we also communicate with the Prime Naaru Xira. Now, Xira's been transmitting messages to us through something known as the Light's Heart. These messages foretell of Illidan Stormrage, remember he was that elven demon hunter from way back, being the one who will destroy the Legion once and for all. So we have to go free him, wake him up at some point. He's kind of imprisoned. Once again, that's another story, but we have to get him back in any case. Eventually, Velen and the Legion Fall armies chase kil'jaeden down and kill him. And he actually expresses regret as he's dying for what he's done to his people finally, after thousands and thousands of years, which is a small comfort, I guess. But Velen's all about forgiveness, so it's fine. Illidan, though, once we've got him back, has plans for us to invade Argus. Remember, Argus is the home planet of the Draenei, originally the Eredar, and it's currently where the Burning Legion have their base, where they generate their armies. The Draenei construct the Vindikar ship to get them there, and they eventually meet the Lightforged Draenei. Remember, the Lightforged are those Draenei who split off into two, so you had the Genedar and the Xenedar, and the Lightforged went off in the Xenedar. What have they been doing all of these millennia? Well, it turns out that when the Draenei left Argus and they split into two, they then dedicated their entire lives to travelling the cosmos and chasing down the Legion to wherever they might exist, destroying them along the way. So, eternal warriors of the light, I suppose. So we all fight the dark world soul of Argus. In World of Warcraft, planets all have a world soul within them. It's a whole thing. We destroy it, and that halts the Legion's ability to regenerate their fallen. And we also imprison the Titan Sargeras, the one who started this entire mess. And with that imprisonment, the Burning Legion is stopped forever. Most of what we hear of the Draenei in Battle for Azeroth relates to the alternate timeline Draenei that I mentioned just a little bit earlier, but all we really know about them is that under the leadership of Yrel, they've actually become extremely fanatical about the light. So we always see the light as good and the void as bad. But what happens when the light goes to an extreme? I feel like more and more as we get into the game in later years and still to come, we're seeing what the extremes of the two sides look like. But that more or less brings us up to today. Yay! Millennia of history of the Draenei and the Eredar condensed into this video. However, before we finish, I have to talk about the very recently released Draenei Heritage Armor questline. Have you done it? Do you want to do it? If you haven't done it yet, maybe this is spoilery, so stick your fingers in your ears. But it's really good. It's actually, I think, my favourite heritage questline that I've done up until this point. It really leans into the sadness of the Draenei lore. There's deep and great grief for these space goats, whatever you want to call them. It's a huge lesson in perseverance and patience as well, which deep down in their souls, if you couldn't tell from Velen and his actions, that's what the Draenei are all about. We even go back to a place called Auchindoun in Draenor, which is a giant temple that the Draenei built to protect the spirits of their dead from the Burning Legion, because the Burning Legion is kind of hell-bent on consuming their souls, so Auchindoun was built to preserve them and protect them. We communicate with the spirits of the dead, and by the end of the Heritage questline, the Eredar are reformed as a concept. The Draenei are still the Draenei, there's no getting away from that, but it repairs the bonds between them, the broken, the lost ones, and even the penitent Eredar, so as opposed to what we call the Man'ari Eredar, who are evil, bad, still hate everything. Penitent Eredar seek forgiveness and are ashamed of what they've done and want to rejoin with their kin. And it's really beautiful. I've never seen the Exiled, the city, so full of life and bright and vibrant and full of people, and it made me really happy. And we have some really cool hints, because in World of Warcraft, we still have as the capital city of the Draenei, the crashed Exiled that crashed many, many years ago, and it hasn't been repaired. But what this questline lays out as a bit of a teaser is that there are plans to build a capital city for the Draenei that is grand and glorious and something that really speaks to their culture and what they've been trying to build for themselves for millennia. Fingers crossed, I can't wait to see how that works out when they come through with it. But that is it for my Draenei lore video. I really hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Do you play a Draenei? Do you enjoy them? What's your favourite class to play with a Draenei? Would you like to play broken or lost ones? Any of the above. Let me know what you think of all of it down below. You know I love seeing all of your thoughts. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Please don't hesitate to leave a like for this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you haven't already. You know, as always, means the world to me. Okay, on to the next lore video. I've got to do some planning. But take care, have a great day wherever you are in the world, and I will see you in the next video.